Hello, everybody. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Tom Davidson. Tom is a senior research fellow at the Forethought Institute for AI Strategy. His work is focused on AI takeoff speeds, and more recently, the threat of humans using AI to stage a coup. To read a transcript of this episode, you can go to axrp.net. You can become a patron at patreon.com/axrpodcast. You can also give feedback about the episode at axrp.fyi. All right, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Daniel.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the, should I call it a paper? So AI-enabled coups, how a small group could use AI to seize power by yourself, Lucas Finvaden, and Rose Hatchar. Paper is the right term for that?
Yeah, I think we've mostly called it a report, but, paper
Okay.
report. Yeah.
Report seems pretty reasonable. Yeah, so, okay, AI-enabled coups. So, I guess it's about using AI to do coups in order to just help the audience, figure out what's going on. Ignore the AI stuff. I'm lucky enough that I've lived in countries that just have not had a coup in a while, and I don't really think about them. How do you do a coup?
Great question. So, the way that the word coup is normally used, there's kind of two kind of main types of coup. At least on one way of carving it up. Different scholars cover it up in different ways, but one natural way to carve it up is that there are military coups.
Yep.
That is a coup performed by the military as directed by some people within the military. Like most often it's very senior military officials because they already have that authority within the military that would allow them to do that.
Yep.
And so that's just a case of senior general kind of instructs battalions to seize control of various important buildings, threatens or intimidates people that might try to oppose, declares that they are now victors over the radio waves. Everyone notices that no one's really opposing them and that all the military is acting in accordance with that declaration, and so it seems to be increasingly credible. And then this kind of this very abrupt transition of power from the old leaders that were kind of functioning within that old legal system. There's this sudden abrupt and legal shift of power. So that's a military coup. Then the other type of coup is that I would kind of point to is referred to as an executive coup. And so that is when you have someone who is already the head of state, so already has legitimacy as a very powerful political figure. But to begin with, there are many checks and balances on their power. So especially in democracies, they'll be heavily constrained. And then an executive coup normally is less discreet, but there might be a point at which you think they've really just kind of fully removed that last check and balance. But the general process there is the head of state is undermining the independence of the judiciary by stuffing it with their loyalists. They're kind of again stuffing the legislative bodies again with people who are going to support them, and actually making legal changes to kind of centralize more and more power in the executive branch in themselves. And then at some point in that process you might be like, okay, at this point the old legal order has really been overturned and there's been an executive coup. And so Venezuela, I think, is the best case study of this happening end to end, because it did start off in the mid 20th century as a pretty healthy democracy, had been going for many decades, but by 2020 was widely considered to just now have been an authoritarian country. And at some point, normally I think people near the end of that process might say, okay, there was an executive coup at that point, but it's a much more fuzzy concept in that case.
Is that also, I've sometimes heard the term self coup or auto golpe. Is that the same thing?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can kind of understand so an executive coup, I guess I kind of have a picture in my head of okay, you consolidate power within yourself, you make the laws accountable to you, you make the somehow you turn the state more and more into yourself, and all of the organs of the state that are loyal to the state are now loyal to you because you just have a bunch of control over the state. For a military coup, what do you actually do? Do you have to just go to the Supreme Court and point guns to the heads of the justices and go to all the police stations and point guns to the heads of the leaders of there help me imagine this concretely.
Yeah, great question. So with a military coup, there is a higher risk that you declare a coup, but then the rest of society, the other organs of government and the other important economic players don't want to play ball.
Yeah.
And so historically that has been a real risk, and there have been cases. There's cases in Ghana where there had been a military coup, and then there was such widespread dissatisfaction throughout various parts of society with the way that things were being governed, that they ended up handing back to a more democratic governance regime, because there's kind of the military personnel are ultimately continuous with the rest of society, and so if they're just kind of brazenly unpopular and the country is just doing badly, and that's quite kind of clear to everyone, then it doesn't really work for them to just kind of be like, we're forcing you to do everything we say, when people increasingly don't want to play ball. And so historically that's been a big issue. I know we're not meant to get onto the AI part, but I do want to just flag that I think very powerful AI will somewhat change that dynamic, because in the case of Ghana, for the country to function well, it needed all those other parts of society to play ball.
Right.
But if we have sufficiently powerful AI systems, it may be possible to kind of replace those other kind of players with automated replacements.
So, okay, there's one end where like some general of some army just stands up and says, I declare a coup, and then sits down. Like that's presumably like, that's not a successful coup, right? Like, like somehow you need to like make people, you need to like actually take control, right? But like countries are really big, right? There's like a lot of stuff going on. There's like more than one building where people are like doing, or where people are like making laws, where the laws are getting enforced. So like do you have to just like are you like storming 5 buildings? Are you like telling people, are you like convincing the rest of the military that they should be loyal to you? And are you convincing the rest of the world that if they like defy you, you'll like go in and like use all the military to kill them? Or like is that what I should imagine?
There's a great book that I think might get to the heart of what you're asking here, called Seizing Power by Singh. And its thesis is that at the core of the logic of a military coup is trying to create a common expectation among all military forces that the coup will succeed.
Right.
So the basic thesis is no one wants to get into a bloodbath where people are killing their civilians, and even other military people from the same country. And so ultimately everyone wants to be on the side of the winner if there is a struggle for power. And that's, according to this thesis, which I find fairly compelling, that is kind of the main determinant of what military personnel are going to do when there's a constitutional crisis, when someone's attempting to do a coup. So this book says that what your task is as someone who's trying to do a military coup is you need to convince initially the military personnel that this is a fait accompli, that you already have the support of all the other military personnel. And so there's this kind of interesting kind of game theory dynamic where there's multiple stable equilibria. Like, before the military coup begins, the stable equilibrium is people may hate the regime, but they think that the regime has the support of the military. So if they went out and tried to, start undermining law and order, they would expect that other people would come and arrest them. And they'd be right, because other people, even if they also dislike the regime, would indeed come and arrest them, because that's their job. And if they don't do their job, then they expect that their kind of associates will look down badly on them. And so it's a self-reinforcing equilibrium. And so what you've got to do when you're doing a military coup is shift that equilibrium over to no, actually now there's this new equilibrium where there's this now new kind of group of people in power. And so a lot of the things that you see happen in military coups can be understood as trying to achieve that shift in equilibrium, that shift in consensus about who is now in control. And so like a classic example that Singh gives in this book is capturing radio stations and then kind of sending forth proclamations of your victory, which are credible. You don't massively exaggerate. You don't say every single person in this country has supported me always, because that would ring false. But you say, we have the backing of the senior military generals. We have executed a coup. The old government has been defeated. And then you do things to make those claims seem more credible, like seizing control of key kind of institutional buildings, for example.
Okay.
And in the absence of vocal resistance, the absence of vocal opposition and of kind of military warfare, then just serves to reinforce this new impression, because you've said it. It kind of looks like it's true. if you look at where the military things that have just happened, and then no one is saying anything else. And if you can get that consensus of opinion within the military, and then you can convince the rest of the society that yes, all of the military, all of the hard power supports this new regime, then the rest of society also, why would you oppose a new regime which is backed by all the hard power? You're just going to get yourself in trouble. So at that point, the rest of society's incentive is then to work within the new regime. So as you say, things were set up with the old regime, so there'll be questions about how you pragmatically reorganize exactly what everyone's doing and how everything fits together. But once you've got essentially everyone in society recognizing, yes, this is the new order, and we can see that that's what everyone's going for, then that's the hard work done. And then it's more like filling in the details of exactly how the new set of bodies will relate to each other, and what the kind of the chain of command will be from the new leader to the various parts of society.
So the picture I have is roughly like, in order to do a military coup, I've got to like persuade the military that we're doing a coup. Like somehow I've got to persuade the military that like, and the rest of the society, presumably, that if anyone like doesn't, defies my new order, they're going to like we're going to come in and we're going to beat them. And presumably in order to do that, I've like actually got to go in and beat some people who like might be considering defying my new order, just to like demonstrate that I can. And maybe that's why I actually stormed the buildings.
I don't know. What do you mean when you say beat someone? I mean, I think, yes, it's you need to show some credible sign that you have the support of military forces. I don't know if you literally need to then go and like shoot down protesters. I mean, that's one effective way to show that you're willing to beat people down. But you don't. There's often coups without any bloodshed.
Yeah, I just mean demonstrate that you can like that if someone tries to resist, they won't succeed, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that involves you killing people. Maybe that involves you like marching in and like people are visibly too afraid to stop you, and this is just a sign that like, okay, apparently you can do what you want now.
There's a great kind of part of this book where it discusses how a common tactic for creating this new shared understanding is to host a meeting with all the top brass of the military and say, we are staging a coup. All of you have agreed and all of you are on board. And then you just watch as no one opposes you, because everyone thinks, it's probably like kind of plausible. And maybe some of them were on board. Others were like, had said they might be on board and had been ambiguous. But once you're all there and you say it and no one opposes you, that already sends a quite a strong signal. And then, often, that kind of meeting could be where that essential shift in equilibrium actually happens.
Okay, so I think I understand coups at this point. The next thing I want to know is, how bad are coups?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Now, coups are most common in countries that are not robust democracies. In fact, they're very rare in robust democracies. So a coup in the United States, I think, would be very, very bad because we currently have, a system of governance with checks and balances and democracy. And I think we'd be losing a lot if we had a coup. When coups have happened historically, they're often starting from much less good governance systems, and so they have been like less bad. But still, coups involve a small group of people just using hard power to force the rest of the country into submission, and often they are extremely bad.
Fair enough.
Bad from a process perspective in terms of justice, but also bad for how the country is governed thereafter.
Gotcha. Okay, I've realized I want to go back into how to do a coup for a final bit. So in some parts of your report, you mentioned that like you only need a small fraction of the military to be on board with a coup to succeed, at least often. That seems crazy to me, because if you have 1/3 of the military and I have 2/3 of the military, I would sort of naively think that I could beat you. Like, I don't know, maybe if you have the best 1/3 of the military, like that, like if you have the 1/3 with nukes, like what's going on there? Like how much of the military do you really need to get on board in order to do this?
So if you have 2/3 of the military and there's strong common knowledge among those 2/3 that they're all on your side, then I agree, I can't do a coup with my 1/3 because I'm outgunned. But if instead there's just the whole military, which kind of thinks, yeah, we're currently Daniel's in charge. Let's say you're the incumbent.
Yep.
And then I come along and I get my 1/10 of the military, storm all the buildings, threaten the key commanders of the military not to say anything, and I create these credible signals that in fact a large part of the military supports me, even if that remaining 2/3 actually backs you. If they don't know that they all feel that way, and there's big uncertainty among their ranks and how they feel, and it just seems like, man, it seems like everyone's backing this new leader, and that's what they're saying on the radio waves, and none of them are denying this. Then I can flip that equilibrium, and I flipped it into an equilibrium that people are less happy with, that military personnel are less happy with, but because they're not able to all get together in a group and be like, do we like this new leader or not? Because that's dangerous, because they don't want to be seen as opposing the new legitimate regime. Otherwise, under this new equilibrium, that's not a good thing for people to know about you. So it is because of those dynamics. It is possible for a minority to stage a coup.
Gotcha. Okay. So now that we know coups are bad, especially if you do them with to the country like the US, and now that we know like how we could do a coup if we really wanted to, let's go to AI-enabled coups. So you've written this report on AI-enabled coups. My sense is that that's because you think they're like bad and like worrisome.
Yep.
And presumably you believe that they are both like somewhat plausible and like quite bad out of the space of things that could happen. Probably we should first go on like why you think AI-enabled coups might be a plausible thing that could happen.
Yeah. So we can start off with where the historical evidence leaves us, which is mature democracies are pretty robust to military coups. They are not recently looking nearly as robust to executive coups. So there's been democratic backsliding in the best example recently might be Hungary, which has become increasingly autocratic through the kind of gradual removal of checks and balances. There's the example of Venezuela we discussed earlier, and many commentators think that this is happening to a very large extent in the United States as well. So I think historically we can say military coups do seem very rare, and executive coups seem like rare for sure, but like not off the cards at all. And many people are worried about them even before bringing AI into the picture.
Okay.
Now we can bring AI into the picture, and I think the first thing AI does is it makes executive coups seem a fair bit more plausible. And two main reasons it does that. The first is that a kind of a group of people in the executive that wanted to do an executive coup might be able to gain a lot of control over very powerful AI in a way that gives them a big strategic advantage over the other forces in society. And so, the dynamics of executive coups as they play out typically involve a power struggle between the executive trying to centralize control and their various supporters, and the checks and balances that were in the system already trying to oppose them. And often, there's a really lot of like push and pull, and sometimes, in the case of Venezuela, the head of state was literally put in jail for a bit by their opponents, then got out and then got reelected, and then ended up really becoming an autocrat. So there's all this strategic maneuvering, and so the first thing is that if the people trying to do the executive coup can get a lot of control over powerful AI and can deny access to similarly powerful AI to their opponents, that could just give them a big strategic advantage in that political maneuvering. That's the first dynamic, which I think makes it higher. The second dynamic is that today, people who are trying to do an executive coup or have already centralized power need to rely on lots of other humans to like help them out, and that constrains their actions in various ways. So normally, it's hard for them to be completely brazenly power grabbing. They need to come up with plausible ideologies and justifications that they can then get supporters to rally behind and support particular moves. But with AI systems that are sufficiently powerful, you can replace those those humans with AI systems. So, rather than having the policies of the government implemented by humans that like have some ethical standards and that don't at this point really want to support, really, really awful surveillance, and that kind of have been brought in on a broad ideology, you can just replace them with AI systems that will just follow the instructions of the head of state with far fewer qualms. And so that can give that head of state that's trying to do an executive an additional kind of edge, because they're less constrained by like having to work within this broad coalition involving lots of other humans. And then the most extreme example that we highlight quite a lot in the paper is indeed armed forces, where like today in the United States, this is very stark. The military personnel are very, very opposed to breaking the law. They're very much loyal to the Constitution. They strongly expect that all the other military personnel are going to do the same. And so it's a really, really tall ask for the head of state in somewhere like the United States to get active help from the military in staging an executive coup. And indeed, Trump has come into some kind of frictions with the military when he's tried to get their help for deterring certain protests. But again, this could be a really major shift as we increasingly automate the military with very autonomous weapon systems, where again the thing we highlight is the most extreme case where you can fully replace a human soldier with a military robot. At that point, under current law, it might be completely legal for those robots to be programmed to just follow the instructions of the commander in chief, the head of state. And so we'd move from this current situation where like if you're trying to do an executive coup in the United States, you're not going to get much help from military personnel, to this new state where like it's kind of up for grabs. What are going to be the loyalties and the decision processes of this new automated military? And so this just introduces a big new vulnerability for really cementing an executive coup with hard power.
Gotcha. So I guess it seems like there's two key factors here. The like sort of two progress bars on AI capabilities that it seems like you want to keep track of. So the first is like roughly how useful is AI for navigating strategic like maneuvering, right? You're like, I'm in prison and but these people think this and these people think this. Like to what degree does AI really help you in this situation? And then the other one is like how loyal can you have the AI be for you? And I think so in the report, you talk about you want the loyalty ideally to be both singular to you and also secret, right? Other people don't know about the loyalty. And in addition, I think that seems like it's important is just that all of these things have these loyalties, right? Like if you have a bunch of AIs, but they're sort of about as diverse as people are, it seems like this is probably harder to get off the ground.
Well, I push back a little bit. Certainly the more the better. But if you could get, say, 10% that are loyal to you secretly, and 90% that are just kind of, if there's any chaotic constitutional crisis, they defer to inaction, then that would be enough. Because you get your 10%, you get your fait accompli, that 90% don't do anything to block it, and there you are.
Fair enough. So, yeah, okay, that's a really, really good point. So in terms of the strategic maneuvering aspect, how much evidence do you think we have about, or I guess in either of these aspects, how much evidence do you think we have about the how useful AI is going to be? How much of these relevant capabilities does it seem to have already?
It's a good question. There have recently been a few studies that were pretty surprising to me on AI persuasion. I unfortunately don't remember the details, but I will just give my high level memory, which is that there was one study that had AI posting on Reddit and then compared the number of upvotes to human commentators who were also posting. It was persuade me of X. And the AI would do a background research about this person and what kind of their demographic was, would tailor make a really emotional story about their own life that really brought it out. And the results were they were in some crazy high percentile. I don't know if it was, I think it might have been the top percent or close to that for persuasiveness. And I was quite surprised because um, that had not been a capability that I'd thought that we were kind of targeting um, with current training techniques.
Yeah, and one thing that's crazy. So this was done on the subreddit r/change my view.
Mhm.
So it was research that was done. My understanding is that it will not end up being published, basically
Yeah.
because so r/change my view. It has basically some rule that you're not allowed to like have an LLM pretend to be a human and like try to persuade a bunch of people of stuff like that. Like that's not okay according to them. Um, and
Crazy.
yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, we probably won't learn as much as we might like to about that study. But the other thing is, so this was done at, I believe, the University of Zurich, which I'm sure they have fine people, but this is not like the world's leading AI lab or the world's leading you know graduate program in AI. Um, so the fact that these obviously like competent but not top tier competent but not top tier AI institution can do it. Like maybe that
Yeah.
lends credence to oh, this is like going further than you might think.
Yeah, and I think there's been one other study, and I actually can't remember the details of this, but again, it found that AI was close to like top percentile humans in persuasiveness.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's updated me towards thinking that AI might be very good at this kind of strategic maneuvering aspect, because one element of that is persuading people. And historically, often that's taken the form of persuading people of an ideology which serves your purposes.
Hmm.
And that seems like the kind of thing that these studies are looking at. They are often studying, okay, here's political topic X. Can you like shift my opinion on it?
Fair enough.
There's then another kind of relevant capability beyond persuasion, which is something like strategic planning,
Hmm.
which is essentially, you're in a situation, you want to achieve a goal. What plan is best to achieve that strategic objective? And that's something where it doesn't seem to me, and it's really hard to predict these things. It doesn't seem to me like the current training procedure is really bringing that out. Like persuasion, at least, obviously trained on loads of conversations where it can see what's persuasive and what's not. It's not that surprising that it's
Hmm.
generalized well there. For strategic planning, it feels more like it would need to have been trained in situations where there's a scenario, and then an action is taken to try and achieve an objective, and then it's a really complicated, socio-political system,
Hmm.
and then it washes out and you see what happens. And it's been trained on the internet, which contains loads of history, and you can probably extract that kind of stuff from history. But it seems more of a stretch to think that from pre-training, it's going to generalize, like pick out those lessons, because it's so much kind of less direct. So this is the kind of thing where you can imagine someone setting up some kind of fancy RL pipeline down the road where they try and extract all of the relevant signal that is currently fairly implicit in internet data, and craft and give it to AI, and maybe also have AI try on various kind of simple artificial environments, and then maybe have AI actually try and achieve things in the real world, and learn from that. But I would expect it to come a bit later in the kind of capabilities tree, compared to things like coding and maths, where you can get a good automated feedback signal.
Fair enough. So okay, that's a little bit on why AI might be able to do coups and what might go into that.
I'll just quickly say that was all in the executive coup part. The other
Oh,
thing I
fair
was
enough.
going to say ages ago is that I think there's this new risk of a kind of corporate coup,
Hmm.
where because AI is going to be so powerful and it's currently being developed and controlled and deployed by private actors, that there's going to be this new by default, there's going to be a big concentration of power in those private actors. And I think that will open up some routes to staging a coup. Now, this is necessarily more of a speculative idea because we just don't have the same historical precedent here.
Hmm.
You do have some kind of coups staged historically by private companies. Normally, it's kind of very rich United States private companies operating in very poor countries. So the Banana Republic is kind of the famous go-to example where this kind of fruit company arranged for there to be a military coup, which kind of helped with their own interest, but it's pretty rare. And so this would be a new kind of risk, but I think the threat models here are plausible enough to be taken very seriously.
So it seems like the threat model is something like, okay, you have this like company, it's making a thing that's like really dangerous, or a thing that could be used to be really dangerous, a thing that could be used to like help you take control of power, and the people that make the thing use it to take control of the power. It seems like there's maybe an analogy in that, countries like buy weapon systems, and the weapon systems are like really like the U.S. Army would be like much worse if they just had to use like rocks and stuff, right? Or or if they had to swim. So like like Northrop Grumman or the BNS, like that might be the wrong name, but these weapons manufacturers, do we ever have instances of them being like, hey, we've got a ton of like fighter planes, like let's do a coup ourselves?
I'm not aware of any. I think there's a few dynamics at play. One is that you need soldiers to use the weapons, and those are trained by the military, and they have this strong commitment to the rule of law. Another is that there's multiple different military suppliers, multiple different companies, and so they would need to all be colluding. And AI does change both of those things. So on the weapon side, I believe we're going to end up in a world of autonomous weapons, and so you won't need those additional, humans in order to stage the coup. And so the companies will literally now be making all parts that are necessary for the military force. And the second is that there are dynamics that could point to very strong market concentration in frontier AI, i.e., maybe just 1, 2, or 3 companies that have the most powerful AI systems. If they're the ones, if those AIs are the ones that are making all the military weapon systems, in the most extreme case, if it's just one AGI project whose AIs are making all the military systems, and there's now this single point of failure, and that project is in an unprecedented position, in that sense.
Fair enough. I guess the other thing that seems maybe analogous is if a country like hires a mercenary force to supplement its military, but it seems hard, like for one, like if the mercenaries are a small fraction of the military, maybe it's like harder for the mercenaries to create common knowledge that the non-mercenary militaries are on board with the coup. But are there examples of mercenary coups?
Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any where it's kind of where the mercenary is like.
Oh, there's the thing that happened in Russia with the guy. What do you know his name?
The guy who started marching towards Moscow.
Yeah, and then he gave up on it.
Yeah. I think it didn't end well for him.
Yeah, but that seems like that seems like almost an example.
Yeah.
Military coups, like executive coups and company-led coups. It seems like there's some plausibility to the idea that like AI could like increase the ability of these situations. I guess the next thing I want to ask is like, so there's a wide universe of like things people worry about with scary things that advanced AI could do. Like how high up on that list of scary things should AI-enabled coups be?
Yeah, my current view would be that in terms of importance, it should be maybe second behind AI takeover.
Interesting.
And if you then factor in neglectedness, then I think it's actually more important on the margin than AI takeover. And I think it's more important than, for example, AI-enabled bio attacks by terrorists, which is another risk from AI that people are focused on. And similarly, kind of AI-enabled misuse in terms of cyber, I'd also put it as more important than that.
Like, do you think it's worse than AI-enabled terrorism, or more likely, or?
Disclaimer, I haven't thought in depth about this comparison, but
fair enough.
It's easier for me to see how AI-enabled coups would have a completely long-lasting effect.
Hmm.
So it's certainly possible that an AI-enabled terrorist literally makes everyone go extinct.
Hmm.
But full extinction is quite hard to get from a bioweapon, especially given that we'll be using AI to develop defenses as we go. And there are many people who want to see everyone die. And so we only need to stop those people getting access to these systems. And it seems like it's not that hard to do that. Like, I mean, past a certain point, it might be necessary to prevent open source. It also might never be necessary to prevent open source, depending on how far ahead closed source is and how quickly we can get the defenses in place, and other kind of inputs that are needed to actually do a bio attack. Whereas with the AI-enabled coups, I think there are very many people who want more power.
Hmm.
Many of those people will by default have a lot of control over AI and might well be in a position to do this.
Hmm.
And the kind of default dynamic of AI development, I think, is just going to really concentrate control of AI development and deployment in the hands of a very small number of people. And so if I'm telling the story, I'm just like, well, look, people want power. They're going to by default have loads of power and the opportunity to use it to gain more power. Like, it's kind of believable that they do it and they seize control. And then once they do, they just hang on to control. It doesn't feel hard to tell a story where this lasts for a very long time. Whereas in the case of bio, it feels a little bit more difficult because we have to like not get the defenses in place, despite the fact it's in all of our interests and all the powerful people want to do that. We have to like actually share these systems, which, you know, we are testing for this risk. We will likely have evidence that there's significant uplift. We have to make them so widely available that the tiny number of very low resource actors that want to do this are able to. So yeah, that's kind of, you know, roughly where I am in terms of putting it as high priority.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Maybe it makes sense to talk a little bit about the scenarios of like, yeah, what, I don't know, types of AI enabled coups and like stuff you could do to prevent them. So, so I guess there's at a high level, there's you've got your corporate AI coups, you've got your like executive AI coups, and you've got your military AI coups. Yeah, which one are you like most excited to talk about first?
Let's start with the executive.
If I imagine what this looks like, should I basically be like, okay, you've got an executive. The executive somehow like gets a significant amount of control over AI development. The executive, like, so in the executive coup, like the executive is just using the AI to like persuade people and or figure out strategy in order to like allow the executive to get like gradually more and more power.
And the other thing they're doing is that they're deploying AI throughout society, especially in the government and military, where the AI is more loyal to them.
So throughout the society and military to make it more loyal to them, I guess part of what the executive is doing is like trying to stop other AI-enabled coups.
Potentially, if you know, if those are seeming plausible, you know, if there's a risk that there's going to be a corporate coup, the executive would want to stop that. But I haven't been thinking that as a primary thing that they'll need to do. The primary thing I think is to centralize power themselves.
Right. So less to like prevent coups and more just to like prevent independent other entities like wielding any power.
Yeah.
So you have these like three risk factors, right? Like singular loyalty, secret loyalty, and exclusive access, right?
Yep.
And so it seems like part of this story is like the executive uses the AI to like do a bunch of stuff, like do a bunch of tricky stuff, and like other people can't stop the executive. And it seems like this is like mostly, or other people can't figure out how to stop them, you know. And this seems like it's largely leaning on exclusive access. And the bit where the executive like has everyone else use like AI that the executive likes, it seems like this is maybe leaning more on like singular loyalty and to some degree secret loyalty. Is that roughly right?
That's exactly the mapping. And normally with the executive, I'm not imagining secret loyalties, although it's possible. Because the executive has so much political power to begin with. They could
Right.
just be like, it's completely appropriate for these AI systems to be loyal to me. They could do the more fancy thing of secret loyalties, but there's a technical hurdle there,
Yep.
and it just might not be necessary for them.
So it seems like these are sort of two routes, or two. I don't know if two routes is the right term, but like
Yeah.
two things that the executive is doing with the AI. I'm wondering,
Yeah.
like, do you need both of them, or if you're an executive trying to do a coup, could you like survive with just one of these?
I think you can do with just the singular loyalties in AIs deployed throughout society
Okay.
version. So, the story would be there's heightened tensions between the US and China.
Hmm.
We're rushing out to deploy AI to the military, and
We
the
being the
executives
U.S.
just, we being the US, the
Okay.
US is doing that, and the head of state is saying, obviously, military AI follows the commands of commander in chief.
Yep.
That's how it should be. That's how that's how the command structure works. We've never had autonomous drones check for whether things are legal before they do follow their instructions in the past. They just do what they're told. That default continues,
Hmm.
and then people will very likely oppose and say, "This is crazy. Wait a minute. Can you just stage a coup?" But the head of state has their supporters and has a lot of power, and
Yep.
has already set a precedent of like really nailing people who push back against them. And so they succeed in pushing us through, and they never had access to any kind of super genius strategy AI because the
Yep.
strategy was just quite obvious. Like, well, yeah, if we just get all the military robots loyal to me, obviously I'm now can do whatever I want. And so I do think
Hmm.
that second path can work by itself.
Yeah. It seems like it's and one concerning thing there is so when you say like, oh, like the AIs are being loyal to the president and they're not checking like other laws and stuff. I think it's not a crazy argument that that is like legally how it should work. Like definitely, like the president is literally the commander in chief, as you know. Like there's a prominent legal theory called the unitary executive theory that like yeah, the president just in his own person like has unitary like control over the executive branches of government. Like oh, I guess I don't know if the military is executive, but like yeah,
I think
it
I think like the design of the Constitution is very much intended to separate and limit the president's degree of control over the military. Like it's very clear
hmm,
the military is loyal to the Constitution. So I
hmm,
think if you were to like take the spirit of the Constitution and apply it to a robot army, it would be clear that you shouldn't just have the robot army doing whatever the president said without checks and
yeah,
balances. I think though that is not how the Constitution was designed. It didn't have caveats for what if we develop a robot army. So as it is currently designed, reading it line by line,
yeah,
I don't believe I cannot be confident that it would rule out this lower robot army as illegal.
fair
Um,
enough.
and so I think you're right that you could make legal arguments that this is at least legitimate, and you could claim it's appropriate given the commander in chief. Although I do think you'd be on shaky ground, given the clear intention of the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I mean maybe one thing going on is just like my understanding is that American jurisprudence, especially at the Supreme Court level, is like very much lean towards like what does the text say rather than what do we believe the intention of the text was, which like plausibly heightens this risk in this domain.
Yep.
So going back to this story, so let's say they only have the like loyal AIs in the military part.
Mhm.
The president like gets all these like military drones or whatever loyal to the president, and then is the story the president then kind of does a military coup of like if any police officers try to stop any of my supporters doing like random violence or whatever, like the military drone will shoot the police. Like, is that roughly it?
Probably it's going to be in the president's interests to not show more force than they need to, because it's
Yep.
going to be useful for them to have everyone continuing to support their leadership and seeing as legitimate. So they'll probably what they do is they kind of increasingly ignore checks and balances on their power, and
Right.
then increasingly it becomes clear that like nothing is going to stop this situation,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, if the protesters come this time, President can just order the drones to go and clear out that protest. Probably not going to shoot everyone, but going to kind of make them go home. And you wouldn't have been able to do that before the robot army. And then increasingly, the president is just doing what he wants, ignoring the checks and balances, integrating AI to replace all of the humans that aren't doing exactly what he says he wants them to do. And if anyone ever tries to really refuse to go along, then at that point he just fires them and has them put in jail or something. And that's kind of a show of strength. And then as no one is able to oppose this, because ultimately the hard power is in the president's hands, it just becomes increasingly clear who's in charge.
Sure. So if I think about this like broad scenario, one thing that's kind of interesting to me, so a background thing I'm thinking about when I'm reading this report is like the relationship between AI-enabled coups and AI alignment or misalignment risk, right?
Yeah.
And so if I imagine this like somewhat minimal version of the executive coup, where basically the way it works is that you just have a bunch of military stuff and it's like powered by AIs, and the AIs are, or at least 10% of them or whatever, are like loyal to the president. Like the AI technology that enables that is just like alignment, right? Like the thing, like getting an AI to do what like a person wants. That's like the problem that we call alignment that we're like all hoping to solve.
Yeah.
So in some ways, this seems like some of the paths I think are like alignment research really would prevent them or make them like a little bit more tricky. But this is interesting because it seems like a one that like really is like cutting against a lot of like technical alignment work, or cutting against is maybe the wrong word, but like not prevented by technical alignment work. I'm wondering like if you have thoughts about that.
I think that if the president knows that AI is misaligned, then he's not going to be wise to give it control of the robot army.
Yep.
If the president believes that the AI is aligned, but in fact it's secretly misaligned, then the president might well give it control of the robot army, think he's aligning it to be loyal to him, and then stage a coup, and then he will be laying the groundwork for AI takeover.
Yep.
But in fact, the threat model of him staging the coup goes through, even though he hadn't solved the alignment problem. And my understanding is that people are mostly worried about this exact scenario where AI seems aligned, but it's not. And so I think basically the threat model still goes through in that scenario. The difference that doing more technical alignment research does is it means that rather than the president maintaining control of the world indefinitely or the country indefinitely after the coup, if you fail to solve technical alignment, then in fact the president is going to be replaced by misaligned AIs, which you may prefer or disprefer depending on various philosophical considerations. But I wouldn't particularly say that if you solve alignment, then you're making this threat model a lot higher, because except to the extent that it's then common knowledge that you've solved it. I think if it was going to be widely known that it's not solved, then I agree. Yes, you are increasing this risk.
So that's how you could do it. Like if you just had control of, or if you only did it via having like singular loyalty kind of throughout like the military, just like one half. Asking about the two halves, right? Like exclusive access to do really good planning and like loyalty of AIs like distributed throughout. If you just had exclusive access, like how do you think you would be able to do an executive queue just via that path?
I think it's a lot less clear. I think the main thing you would do with exclusive access is the most obvious thing you would do is then try and convert this first path to that second path. So you'd use your exclusive access to get, AI strategy advice and AI technical analysis about how you could get loyal AI systems deployed throughout critical systems. And so they might advise you to do secret loyalties. They might advise you on, a particular political strategy for like pushing through the more overtly loyal AI systems. I think that's the most obvious route. If you were like, could you use exclusive access to staging a coup without going via this other kind of singly loyal AI approach? I don't know how important this question is, but I think it's basically unclear. If you buy into the more sci-fi-esque claims about what super intelligent AI will be able to achieve, then
Hmm.
yes, you could do this, because what you could do is you could set up a group of automated factories somewhere, maybe as as part of a kind of um, military R&D project that you managed to kind of push through, and then you just quickly make very powerful, fully automated weapons, nanobots, or just amazing drones. And then even though they weren't really ever integrated into the official military, they just then straight out stage a coup. So
Right.
you then stage a coup without having to integrate AI in any kind of formal institution. But it leans much more heavily on what you can get through super genius AIs, and then like a relatively small amount of physical infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that or yeah, there's this interesting thing that's going through the back of my mind as I read this. So like in general, when someone is like, "Oh yeah, I'm worried that like in the future we'll have more powerful AI, and the powerful AI is going to mean that people can do a bad thing." Like I think a natural question to ask is like, well, why don't other people use the powerful AI to stop you from doing the bad thing?
Mm.
And so for the first path of like executive coup, where the president gets all the like military AIs to be singularly loyal to him, presumably that's him or her. Presumably that's like the reason other people don't use AI to stop that is because like this is like at least arguably legal and arguably legitimate, and like at some point you'd be doing the coup if you like resisted. Um, and I guess exclusive access is another story where like people don't stop you because like they just don't have as good AI compared to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if yeah, I guess that's more of a comment than a question. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's clear where the asymmetry comes with exclusive access. And then with singular loyalties, the asymmetry is you and not everyone else is deciding, the behavioral dispositions of these AIs deployed throughout society. And so it's you're kind of leveraging your political power to push through this kind of asymmetric AI loyalty in broadly deployed systems.
I guess like part of the asymmetry here is like if you if you don't have exclusive access, then presumably if people are willing to break the law, like they can do some amount of just preventing you from having uh exclusive loyalty by like using their like subbing in their AIs or like using their AIs to help them figure out how to like stop you, make it appear that things have exclusive loyalty to you, but like they don't actually.
I'm not sure. So, again, going back to the military case,
Hmm.
you could have the hardware of these military robots. You could then be like, I'm deploying this AI software which is loyal to me. No one else can then go and like actually deploy their own AIs on some of those military robots, because it's just infrastructure that the
Hmm.
government controls.
Hmm.
And similarly, you could imagine fully automating some kind of implementation body of government which has some formal authorities, and now no one else can again sub in their own AI, because their AI could do analysis, could make recommendations. They wouldn't have the formal legal authorities to like take actions within within the political system, and so again they wouldn't be able to sub it in. I think if we're talking about human employees still working
Yeah.
within those organizations and using AI assistants, then it's more like, okay, they could sub it in.
Yeah, and I guess it's even tricky just because like the president just inherently has a wider scope to do this. So one thing I think I'm imagining is like there's like the president, there's like I don't know, a few branches of the military. The military has various admirals, and then under the admirals or whatever, there's like a bunch of like robo soldiers. And I guess I could maybe imagine like okay, one of these admirals is like gets their robo soldiers to be loyal to the admiral and not to the president. But like you sort of need a bunch of the admirals to do that. Like going to the earlier point of creating like you know creating common knowledge.
Yeah, I imagine it would be more people who are involved in the procurement process and the technical side of
Hmm.
that process of setting up the AI software than people who are kind of charged with making the strategic analyses in real
Hmm.
time. That might be in a position to do that. But yeah, I agree that there could be people in the military who could do that.
So okay, we've talked about the paths that an executive could use to do a coup. Um, I think I want to pivot to the paths that an AI company could use to do a coup. Because at first blush, it seems like both of the things you said could kind of work for the AI company, right? Like if the AI company can get all the robo soldiers to be loyal to the AI company, and if the AI company
Yep.
can have exclusive access to its own AIs, like that seems like maybe it's putting the AI company in a pretty good place, right?
Yes, I think for exclusive access, it's easier for the AI company. They are just going to have it by default.
Yep.
For the head of state or the executive branch to get exclusive access, they would have to intervene in quite a substantial way
Right.
with the development process. I think the thing that's harder for the AI companies that in terms of deploying these loyal AI systems throughout society, there's a much higher technical hurdle.
Yep.
Where they have to make them secret, really hard to detect. You know, like let's say they train GPT-7 to be secretly loyal.
Yep.
It could be 5 years later that someone discovers a new testing procedure, and if those weights have been stored somewhere,
Yep.
then someone realizes, whoa, like OpenAI trained a literal secret loyalty, and then the game's up. So it's like potentially like you really have you probably want to really cover your tracks, and lock down those weights, make sure no one can ever run any tests on them that you don't want to run. And if today AIs are not that reliable, their personalities are somewhat haphazard, it's all a bit of a mess. Today, I think it would be very hard to get away with a very hard to detect secret loyalty, and it might just be that it's hard to predict how hard it will be to detect these secret loyalties. So it might be that the company is considering this. It's like we could put in this really subtle back door, but we don't know like what people are going to do on this API testing. We don't know if some of our employees might test for this in certain ways. That some of our employees will have access to deeper analysis tools. There's going to be records of the training data. Like, are we going to be able to delete all of those? And if not, what if someone goes looking? It could be. There might just be genuine uncertainty about whether this is possible until quite late in the day. I imagine that at some point, once you got really super intelligent AI systems, they would be able to come up with a plan here. But it might be that for most of the intelligence explosion, the analysis is just like seems like you might get caught. Whereas for the executive coup, the president is doing everything in plain sight. There's no risk of like getting caught because
Right.
they are claiming that they have legitimate reason to do all these things as they go, and they're defeating their opponents as they go. And so there's less downside risk. So that would be like the counter argument. I think there are things on both sides of the ledger in terms of which is more likely, but the counter argument is just that the technical hurdle is much higher.
Yeah. So maybe this is actually, so I'm trying to give myself some hopium to stop myself from worrying about this. And maybe one path I have is like, okay, AI-enabled coups, it seems like it's much easier to do it if you're the AI company because you have all the AI, but you have to have this hurdle where the loyalty of the AI kind of has to be secret, right? It seems to me that the worry about that is like, suppose you're an AI company and you manage to, like, you succeed in instilling this secret loyalty to yourself. I think that should make you rationally worried that, well, like if an AI can do like secret loyalty, like having secret goals that it like pursues, this is like very basically just the same thing as far as I can tell as deceptive misalignment, where an AI is like pretending to be aligned to you, but it's actually not aligned to you. It actually just wants to do whatever it wants. And so I would think that if an AI company succeeds at getting a secretly loyal AI, they would rationally be concerned that the AI that they think is secretly loyal to it is actually like deceptively misaligned, that if they use this AI to get a bunch of power, the AI is actually just going to take over and like, it's not going to be the AI corp that rules everything. It's going to be like some random AI desires.
Yeah.
What do you think of my hopium?
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I think that you are right that the AI company would know that the AI has the capability to do deceptive misalignment. But the AI company might still have strong reason to think that it will not have the propensity. It might have done, careful, interpretability throughout training or whatever alignment techniques you believe might work. It might have, various empirical evidence to suggest that it is in fact not misaligned, even if it would be capable of doing that. And in fact, it might not even have evidence of the capability. If the company is really just like, being, really just going for this, then it could have very sophisticated internal tests for scheming, which in fact the AI cannot game. And it could just and then it could kind of train an AI to be secret loyalty, but then that secretly loyal AI is only able essentially to game tests that it's been trained on how to game. So it can game all the company's tests, it's been trained on that. That's not scary. Obviously you can game a test if you've been told how to pass it. It can gain, the unseen tests of auditors outside of the company because they're much less sophisticated. But the company could still believe that the AI is actually not capable enough to game a highly sophisticated test that it has not been taught how to pass. And so actually, even on the capability side, it wouldn't really have evidence that the scheming capability, it needn't have evidence that the scheming capability is there.
Yeah, I guess there's also this, so one thing is it could be secret to people other than the lab, but not or other than the AI company, but not the AI company. You could also have, you might think that if the first AI that you can succeed at making secretly loyal via doing a bunch of special build training, I guess it seems somewhat reasonable to think that if you a thing that you could the first thing you can make secretly loyal by doing a bunch of special build training maybe couldn't be secretly loyal by just the normal course of pre-training.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. I think that the risk of secret loyalties, I think, is very likely to emerge before the risk of scheming, because it just seems way harder to zero shot how to pass all these tests and know what your strategic situation is and exactly when to act out, versus if you just have, a million super smart AIs figuring all of this out, training you how to do it, doing all this analysis. It's just the difference between what I can figure out in a few seconds on the fly and what, a large civilization doing a concerted research effort can figure out, orders of magnitude difference in how much you can achieve. And so I do think the secret loyalties thing, I strongly expect to become technologically feasible at an earlier stage.
I think it's still, okay, here's why I'm holding on to my hopium. I think there's this risk aversion. I think it depends a little bit how risk averse you are, right? So suppose you're okay, I managed to instill a secret loyalty. Let's say I think I'm 95% confident that the AI doesn't have its own secret loyalty. 1 in 20, if you're the head of an AI lab, you have I think they have pretty decent lives. I don't know, I've never chatted with Sam Altman or Demis Hassabis or from the outside it seems like they have relatively cushy lives, right? 1 in 20 chance of you hasten AI doom by starting a coup. That's pretty bad, right? So it seems you don't. It has to not only be true that the AI doesn't have secret loyalty. You have to be pretty confident in it.
Well, let's say that OpenAI trained GPT-7. It did the capabilities tests. It did the kind of alignment tests that it has, and it was we're going to deploy it. We're happy with this system. They got a certain level of evidence, and let's say it's really capable. It's really good at strategic deception. But indeed, people in this community worry that they would decide to deploy nonetheless. Maybe the risk is 5%. Maybe they think it's 0.5%. The question is, if they're now considering instilling a secret loyalty, is that going to significantly materially increase that risk? And I think it's not actually something I thought about. You could argue, well, look, you're going to be actively teaching it all these different types of strategic deception. That seems like maybe it's increasing this risk. But the reason why I'm not sold is that I don't see why you'd be actively teaching it to, in fact, be misaligned. You're obviously giving it capabilities which are scary. But if you've already decided how likely you think it is to be misaligned, you've already decided you're happy deploying it, are you going to now be more worried about it suddenly becoming misaligned as you train it to be loyal to you? That doesn't seem like it would be the case.
Yeah, I think what I'm imagining, which maybe doesn't actually make sense, what I'm imagining is you have an overall plan, and your overall plan has 2 parts, right? Part 1 is instill these secret loyalties, and part 2 is have the AI be more widespread and have more ability to gain power than you by default were planning, right?
Yeah.
And the combination of that is pretty bad. Now, if you're already going to if you were holding fixed how far you would spread the power of the the AI or whatever.
Yeah.
Then I agree instilling your own secret loyalties. I think it provides some Bayesian evidence. I think maybe it seems plausible to me that being able to do it is like some evidence that like it might have already had the secret loyalty, but I think it's less bad than like the 2-part plan. So
Yeah. And I think it's a good point. I hadn't thought of this, that if someone did want to stage a coup using their AI system, they probably would want to push it out into the world faster, faster than other AI companies, because, if half the military is now controlled by this other AI company, then it becomes much less clear that you can pull off the coup. So I think it's a good point that to the extent that you are already worried about misalignment, and therefore you wouldn't have wanted to push out your AI to the military, that would then, continue to stop you from pushing out your AI to the military to stage the coup. And that provides some hope. But my baseline has actually just been, we're already worried that the AI companies will just be pushing out their AIs all over the place because they won't be that worried about misalignment. And then once we take that for granted, then the risk of them staging a coup is very real. I guess where I'd agree with what you're saying is that to the extent that these companies are worried about misalignment, I do think that helps because it will give them pause.
I think it's a good chance that like I think it's a good point that if there's only like if you're already deploying and maybe you're like, if I'm planning to do a coup, I'm going to deploy 20% more, that's probably not going to be the difference between. I think that's a pretty decent point.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the report, the illustration and the way we've talked so far is like, we're sort of imagining it's like the head of the AI lab that's doing this. One thing I kind of wonder about. So, friend of the podcast, Jan Leica, is head of alignment at, Anthropic. Seems like a chill guy. I don't want to cast any aspersions on any of the heads of alignment of any of these labs. But wouldn't they be in a really, really great position to do this?
No, I'd normally thought that it was the people who were involved in post-training and were involved in, let's say, the fine-tuning runs that give the AI its particular personality and goals that would be best placed. The team at OpenAI that's ensuring the AI matches the model spec, because they're the ones that are kind of influencing the particular values, and they could maybe try and insert an extra stage at the end that that isn't reported, that inserts the secret loyalties. And then I was imagining the alignment people would be the ones that then do the tests for the kind of accidental misalignment. But I think really it's both that you'd want. The ideal coalition would include both, because you have the team instilling the secret loyalties colluding with the team that's meant to be detecting them. But you don't necessarily need the detection team, because if the team that's instilling them can access the code of the alignment team, then they can teach the AI to pass the test. And so this is another reason to have siloing within AI organizations, so that you can't teach it to pass the test in that way.
Yeah, I'm now realizing that I know less about the exact internal structure of these labs. So
yeah, neither do I.
Good thing I'm not trying to make a coup happen. But that's a good point. And again, no individual aspersions to anyone I might know who works in these teams. I feel decently happy with how we've covered corporate coups. Is there more you want to say there, or shall we move on?
Another technical hurdle I'll just flag is that I don't expect GPT-7 to be given control directly of all the robots and all the drones. I expect there to be specialized AI systems which are developed that control those particular military weapons. And so there's this other technical question over, even if you had all GPT-7 secretly loyal to some group of people, there's then this big question of like, they have to now do all this military R&D, design all these new weapons and drones, and build the AIs, the specialized AI systems that will control those drones and weapons, and they need to do so in a way that ensures that this small group of people ultimately has control over what this whole very complicated, interrelated military infrastructure is going to be. It's not just going to be carbon copies of the same robot. Just it's not going to be one AI system. It's probably going to be very complicated. There are hundreds of different AI systems controlling hundreds of different bits of equipment that interact in complicated ways. probably we're not literally going to have robot soldiers that replace one-for-one human soldiers. That's just a simplification to explain how intense we're imagining this dynamic being. And so there's an open question over, okay, as you get this kind of sprawling military these sprawling military systems interacting in complicated ways, controlled by various AIs and other things, how easy is it for GPT-7 or GPT-8 to like ensure, as they're building all of this stuff, that it's all going to be ultimately controllable and lawyable or hackable by the AI company or by copies of themselves? Where like, I just don't know, but it seems like it might be really hard. The military contractors might have humans or less powerful AIs reviewing these designs and noticing like obvious flaws. The military isn't stupid. They have serious security practices. They're worried about Chinese attempts to kind of seize control. They might be worried that there are indeed Chinese spies in the labs that might be having influence on these AI companies. So you might well expect there to be significant defense efforts from the military. Fingers crossed. Looking for this kind of thing, and maybe just a really tough technical task to design a very complicated physical infrastructure that is ultimately all controllable by a particular AI system or particular copies of an AI system. And so just like, I think it might be very hard to predict in advance whether that works. And that's another significant technical hurdle that might just turn out not to be doable. Which I think should give us pause for concern, or rather for hope in terms of whether the company coup is doable.
So there's a few paths towards an AI-enabled coup that we've talked about. There's like basically the head of the executive doing it. There's the lab company doing it, and also there's this free variable about like there are a variety of countries that could be couped. I'm wondering, I'm wondering if you have a sense of the relative like likelihoods of these things happening.
It's a great question. In terms of countries, I think that in the fullness of time, current countries that are already fairly autocratic, like China and Russia, I think are at very large risk of an executive coup, because the executive is just starting in such a strong position to begin with. So, all of those steps, they basically accomplish, the first half or more. And then, it's quite plausible they could use their existing power to push through the deployment of loyal systems throughout society. So I think that is worryingly likely, honestly. It sometimes feels a bit hopeless to me in terms of how we avoid that. You can imagine one country really intervening in another country's affairs. That's not something I like really feel excited about pushing towards. The other thing is, is really kind of encouraging the other actors that still have some power in those societies to really be live to these issues and get ahead of the game. And maybe they can kind of outmaneuver the head of state, even though the head of state is in a very strong position.
So to the degree that part of the reason you're worried about AI-enabled coups is that you think that there's like some concentration of AI labs or, a small number of labs that are powerful. I mean, presumably one way of preventing this is like, suppose like you and the AI lab are simpatico, and suppose you have a list of like, here are the countries that I'm most worried about having a coup. You could say like, hey, lab, we're just like not selling to those countries. Which is obviously like, it's a somewhat geopolitically aggressive move, I guess.
You might also be able to sell AIs that have guardrails that prevent their use to enable an executive coup. It would be very complicated because, if you're just setting up a surveillance state, there's just lots of, somewhat narrowly defined tasks that you want your AIs to do, but you could try and, differentially allow them to deploy AI systems that won't centralize power as an intermediate.
I guess the tricky thing about that thing is it's just very like if you have some countries who do get to use like AI in their militaries, and some countries where like either they don't or the AI they get to use is like, filtered for like not doing a coup, and like maybe other countries don't trust that that's like the only thing they've like monkeyed with. Like, it seems like it might be a pretty aggressive move, which
I don't know how aggressive it's going to be to just not sell a powerful technology. I think that might be the default
Hmm.
situation with a really powerful AI, that just for kind of national security reasons, you wouldn't want countries that you're adversarial towards to have access to those most powerful systems.
Fair enough.
But to me, the worry is it's just a delaying tactic, and that
Yeah.
in the fullness of time, there will be, China will develop its own powerful AI and sell access to autocracies that want it.
So maybe another question is, so I'm not from China. I don't live there. I wish the best for the Chinese people. Um, if there's a if there's a coup in China, an AI enabled coup in China, to what degree is the concern like China is autocratic forever?
And just to be clear, probably in China it would be less called a coup and more, well, it would be an executive coup, but it might just be cementing the system that already exists if you already consider it to be autocratic.
Also, by the way, I'm asking about China, but I'm not really just specific to China. I'm mostly just thinking a bunch of countries that I don't live in.
Yeah.
If there's like a relatively autocratic country,
Yeah.
it has an AI enabled coup slash cementation of power. To what degree is that concerning because that country is like autocratic forever? Versus to what degree is that concerning because like, you know, maybe that country like becomes more bellicose and like starts trying to take over the world, or it's like a promoter of conflict.
Yeah. I think it depends on exactly what you care about. One lens you can take is the kind of hard-nosed long-termist lens, where you say, okay, what
Hmm.
we care about is control of the stars over the long term. And so then you'll be kind of thinking, okay, would this, perhaps some less powerful country, would the new dictator hang on for power for long enough, for it to be indefinite, and would they be able to get a sizable fraction of the stars such that there's been a significant loss of value? If it's a not very
Hmm.
powerful country, you might, from that really like hard-nosed long-term perspective, say, well, it's not going to be powerful enough to actually gain any of the stars. Probably the United States is just going to, basically be carving up the stars with China or just taking them all for themselves. So,
Hmm.
though it's a tragedy in terms of the people who live in those countries, from the kind of brutal utilitarian calculus, um,
Hmm.
it matters a lot less. I mean, that's one lens.
Hmm.
Then the other lens would just be the humanitarian lens that says, that this is awful for the people in that country, and also if that country is able to kind of strike a deal with countries like the United States, then they might be able to embed themselves permanently, even if ultimately United States has most of the hard power.
Yeah, I think there's this uncertainty I still have about the domestic versus the international impact of
Hmm.
doing a coup.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. So I could imagine one story where like if you do, especially an AI enabled coup,
Yeah.
you get like all the military like really unified behind you.
Yeah.
Maybe that just makes your military more effective because they all have one purpose. You have like access to this like really good planning,
Yeah.
and if you compare to militaries that like basically haven't been involved in a coup, that are like different people with slightly different desires, and they're not as ruthless.
Mm.
There's one story where like that military is at a significant advantage. You can also have a story which is like, well, seems like it's generally good, like somewhat dispersion of power seems like it generally like makes things run better, so maybe this is not a concern. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you have thoughts there.
Yeah. One related thought I have is that, let's say there's not a coup in the United States.
Yeah.
I then personally think it's unlikely that the United States would end up completely dominating the rest of the world and kind of seizing all power economically and all strategic control for its own citizens to the exclusion of all others. Because
Hmm.
the United States, a few reasons. Firstly, the United States has many different coalitions with power, and many of those coalitions have ideologies that make them committed to um, things like democracy, things like trade, um, and have kind of positive views of other countries, like say the United Kingdom where I live, and they just wouldn't want the United States to kind of dominate the United Kingdom as much as it possibly could. And so that balance of power in the United States would ensure that the United States uses its power in a way which like does go somewhat beyond its borders. And the
Hmm.
other thing is just that if the United States wanted to completely dominate the rest of the world, probably what it would want to do is to like really restrict the AI systems that it sells to the rest of the world and kind of really sell those systems, access to those systems at the highest price it could. Whereas under the default situation where power is distributed within the United States, different companies within the United States will compete to sell AI services to the rest of the world, driving down the cost that the rest of the world is paying. And so under because of competition within the United States, that means that actually the United States is going to give the rest of the world a bit of a better deal. And so, under this default scenario where power is distributed, I think there's less prospect for the United States to really just take power for itself, even if it's leading on AI. Whereas if there is an AI-enabled coup and one person becomes dictator with total power, then they might be like, I want to dominate the world. I want all control, and I'm just going to force all these companies to, only sell at this extortionate rate. And, the rest of the world has no other source of powerful AI, so they'll pay it. And then I'm going to, choose our foreign policy and economic policy to only take into account the welfare and power of the United States in particular. And so I do think that if there's an AI-enabled coup, then that could, in a particular country, then that, as you indicated, that country might become more bellicose at pursuing its own particular interests, and could actually do so more effectively.
And I guess there's also just this factor of if you're doing a coup, you're probably a bit of a bellicose person, you're probably more inclined to that sort of thing than other people.
Exactly. I mean, you raised a good question about, are democracies just going to be more efficient? Because, the free market's fairly efficient. You're kind of distributing the decision making. I think, a scary possibility is that you can still gain the benefits of the free market by distributing all the economic decision making and having, markets operating within the country, but you still have on all the important decision points AIs that are loyal to one person. And so you can kind of get all those kind of economic benefits of democracy now without actually needing to have a real democracy. But I haven't thought much about whether that would go through.
Something to think about. And so speaking of democracy and speaking of the United States, so initially you said probably countries that already have a very strong executive that already are less democratic probably are more at risk to having a stronger executive and being even less democratic. I live in the United States. I'm a fan of it. What do you think how high do you think the risk is that the United States gets AI-enabled coup?
I mean, if I had to pick a number, I'd say 10%, but it's very made up. That's my rough probability for AI takeover as well. I think it's ballpark similar.
Okay. And how can you talk me through why is it as high / as low as 10%?
By analogy with AI takeover, or just
in
and of itself?
In and of itself.
Yeah. So I think some things are fairly likely to happen. We're likely to see a very small number of companies developing super intelligent AI systems. We're likely to have a government that, if it tried to, could gain a lot of control over how those capabilities are used, via its kind of default monopoly in force, its NatSec apparatus. If they don't, then by default, power is already and will continue to be very concentrated within the AI companies. There are not in practice many effective checks and balances on the CEOs in these companies. I also believe that it's quite likely that CEOs will want on the margin to just increase their own power and use their influence over AI to increase their influence more generally. So you can already see with Grok, Elon is doing this in a totally shameless way. It's getting altering Grok's prompts to make it kind of promote political views that he likes. And I think it's just, a natural urge if you want stuff and you want a bit more power, and you just have this way of getting it, which is that you're controlling these hugely powerful, influential AI systems. So I do think it's quite likely that on the margin that these company leaders will walk down that path of increasing their own power to some extent. But there are also some things which I think are not particularly likely. They may happen, but it's will at any point a kind of a key company executive decide to do something which is, really egregious. Like at some point they might need to decide to do a secret loyalty. I think there's a chance that that's just a step too far. Or there's a chance that by the time that's possible, the world has woken up and just put in some kind of checks and balances that would make that hard to do.
Yeah.
And then there's the technical question on like, okay, but would this actually work out? We're pointing to some of these difficulties of actually getting these secret loyalties propagated to the military infrastructure, being really confident the AI isn't actually secretly misaligned. So, really zooming out, maybe there's like, a couple of two or three couple of steps which are like, I wouldn't say it's more than 50%. And so, that gets you down. Let's say there's 2 steps which are 40% each. Or, we're just in this rough range where it's like, it's about, it's about 10%. Like, as I'm thinking this through, I'm thinking maybe it should be higher because you've got either the lab route or you've got the kind of executive route, and maybe you actually just want to add those up. Yeah, that's just a brief indication.
Yeah. So, okay, I think at this point I'm interested in just talking about like how maybe what people should do about this. And probably I'm going to be most interested in thinking about this from like a US perspective because like that's where I live and what I think the most about. Although I'm also interested in like other places.
Yeah.
So
I do think it's the most important case.
Yeah. So it seems like the most so a lot of these stories, right, are about like a synthesis of AI power and military power.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like one thing you could do to this for this proposal is like, or AI power, military power, and like executive power, right, all coming together in like a really concerning way. Sometimes people are like, the U.S. government should like have this like really big push to develop like really powerful AI that it does itself with like strong pushing AI forward really hard, having exclusive access to the AI, and it should be like really integrated within the government. It seems like this is probably like pretty bad from the coup perspective. I'm wondering if you have takes there.
So I think if you did this really well, it could be good from the coup perspective. If you very carefully designed a project explicitly with reducing this risk in mind, I think you could probably actually reduce coup risk relative to the status quo, just because the status quo is so poor. Like under the status quo, there's very little constraining labs, so there's very little guard against the company coup, but there's also no like explicit checks and balances that would constrain the ability of the executive to just demand that the companies sell them access to AIs without guardrails that they can deploy throughout the government and military. And the companies, if there's a few of them, would be in like potentially quite weak negotiation position with the executive over that. So because the status quo is so bad, I think if you design a good centralized project, you could reduce this risk. Now, I think probably the best way to minimize this risk would be to design a kind of a system of regulation where you continue to have multiple kind of constrained regulated projects with various transparency and safety constraints in place, etc. That would probably bring the risk down lower still. And yeah, that would be better than a centralized project from this perspective.
One thing that occurs to me as well is so again, I still have in the back of my mind, okay, like how do like AI alignment concerns affect this? It seems like a lot of the things that people want out of AI alignment could potentially help with this, right? So like transparency, like causing companies to do evaluations of their models, having like having like whistleblower protection schemes.
Yep.
It seems like a lot of these probably at least like reduce the chance that like AI labs do stuff in ways that like the rest of the world doesn't know about. Maybe it increases the risk that like if you're worried about governments being like meddling too much with AI companies to like do tricky things there, like maybe that's a concern. But yeah, I'm wondering like having strong like AI security institutes or something, like how much do you think that helps with coup risk?
I think all of the stuff you listed helps, and yeah, in combination helps a fair bit. And yeah, I do think like just a lot of the all the interventions here are like pretty generally good across both coup risk and misalignment risk. The place where they really potentially bump heads is like whether to centralize into just one project versus having careful regulation of multiple projects. But beyond that, I tend to think that like pretty much there's pretty strong alignment. There's different areas you focus on. So like you're particularly concerned with like, oh, how is everyone actually using the compute within, the AI companies and within the government? And like you're relatively less concerned with like looking for like rogue deployments, because it's just the kind of legitimate deployments that we might be more worried about now. But monitoring use of large compute, that's where framing it, where that's both catching the misalignment risk and the risk of coups.
So I think I want to talk about things that are maybe more unique to coups. So one thing that you don't mention in the report, as far as I could tell, but seems interesting to me, a lot of the coup risk seems to come from like you have one AI company. It's like relatively dominant. It's relatively in the lead. It's hard for other people to compete, and they're doing like sketchy stuff within that company. At least for like company enabled coups. Currently, it's like relatively common for employees. It's like not unheard of for employees to like switch around between companies. Like there's a decent amount of it happening, and it seems like this probably helps like partly for like it means that like labs don't have like super intense secrets. Well, like they probably have some secrets of exactly how they do some things, but like the general structure, I feel very confident that that the latest Claude and OpenAI models are based on the transformer architecture, right? Like if they did something totally different, I just feel like we would have heard of that.
Yeah.
So it feels like it both protects against like them doing something like if OpenAI were like, hey, all of our employees, we're doing a bit of a coup, I feel like people would hear about that. And then B, like maybe it protects against like one lab just going super, super far ahead of the other labs. So some combination of A, like labs like people moving between labs, and B, some good old corporate espionage. It seems like this maybe helps. I'm wondering if you have thoughts.
Some of the benefits you're describing, I think, just come from the fact that the labs are humans who are integrated throughout broader society and will talk about really notable things. If a lab tried to tell everyone, look, don't mention this, but we're doing a coup. Doesn't matter whether employees are switching between labs, like that's going to backfire. Right. So then what do we get from the employees switching? I do think you're right. We're getting some kind of evening of the playing field. My view is that you can get a lot of the benefits by having two separate labs in terms of coup risk reduction. Because if you have two separate labs, they can separately train AIs using different stacks, and then they can have the AIs kind of cross-audit each other for secret loyalties. You can kind of deploy both systems. In the military, so you have like significant additional check and balance there, where if you could have both AIs controlling each robot. So there's maybe the OpenAI system is controlling the robot, but the public system can shut it down. And so with a setup like that, you could significantly reduce the risk, because even if one system is secretly loyal, that doesn't give you strong reason to think that the other system is also secretly loyal and colluding. So I think, if you had movement between companies, which made it less like we just end up with one company, instead meant that we get to two or three, then I think that would be good.
So one thing you mentioned is you think that it's important for AIs to be aligned to like follow the law, and to not be like kind of loyal to like one individual and just like the law in general. One concern I have about this, and in fact about like AI-enabled coups in general, is it feels like it is possible for countries to be too stable, right? Like, I think that it is possible for the law to be followed too much. The law being followed too much, I think like one version of that is like it is sometimes very unclear what the law involves. A kind of silly version of this is I'm like only 90% sure that the existence of the United States Air Force is constitutional, because it doesn't The Constitution doesn't actually say that you can have an air force, right? Because they didn't think about it. It says you can have an army and a navy. Can you have an air force? I don't know. I mean, that's a bit of a silly example, but like the U.S. Constitution, it is like a little bit ambiguous in many places. But at a high level, like if I imagine, so for example, like the reason there's a United States, right, is that one part of the United States sort of like broke away, one part of like the United Kingdom broke away from the rest of it, right, and that was, I assume, illegal, right? Like it was illegal. It was like a portion of the United States, like breaking the law and being loyal to like one sort of entity within the United Kingdom versus other things. And like in general, it seems like it's probably good for it to be possible for like sometimes bits of states break away illegally and do their own thing. Like, how much of preventing coup risk will also prevent like, especially via the means of making sure that things are aligned to like the official law, will prevent like bits of states breaking away in a way that seems like healthy in the long run?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think we want to get a balance between locking out the bad stuff, locking out the egregious coups, but as you're saying, we don't want to lock in too much. We don't want to, as an extreme case, we definitely want to lock in like the rules of today can never be changed. So we obviously want to have some process by which we collectively can decide to change the laws, and I think that's by default how it'll happen. I had previously thought that, look, if we lock in the laws of today in a kind of sensible, nuanced way, then we will leave enough flexibility to collectively decide to change things, and there could be some process by which it is legitimate for a state to break away. But I think you're actually right. In practice, it may be that like the naive way of implementing even a nuanced version of the law, it's possible that would actually lock in too much, and that I haven't thought much about how much really positive stuff has happened historically via law breaking, and do we expect that to continue to be the case even in mature democracies like the United States? Like, do we want to allow California to just declare that it's independent illegally, and do we want its AIs to go along with that? I think it's a really good question, and it kind of highlights the way in which we may be going down significant path dependencies as we automate the kind of government infrastructure and military, because we will implicitly, once we've automated the whole government and the whole military, we will have implicitly baked in answers about whether AIs will support various different maneuvers. Like, we'll have implicitly baked in an answer about, look, if California tries to break away and all of its citizens support it, and most of the broader US supports it, but it's actually technically illegal, and there will be some decision that infrastructure of AIs will come to about whether it's going to support. If push comes to shove and there's like going to be a military intervention, what will the AI military do? That's a constitutional crisis, and we will be baking in some implicit answer to the question of what will happen there. Well, like, who will the AI military support? And I think it just highlights like we should think very carefully before we do this. And there's kind of no way to not give an answer. Like, you can't. There's no default, because the default, today's world is just, I guess, there's a kind of power struggle and random stuff happens. And I think it's a fair point that maybe it's actually good that you can sometimes do illegal stuff, because it adds more variety. And so maybe you want to, maybe in the ideal world we would, have, we'd say, look, in constitutional crises, be wise, consider what's best for the the broad future, and make the best decision that balances all these interests. And we hope that would actually be an improvement on the status quo, where it's just kind of random and determined by power. Maybe we can get something that's at least based on some kind of desirable principles, when there are kind of more edge casey constitutional crises, and maybe we don't always make it come down to the letter of the law.
Yeah, so there's one version of this which is like being pro-pluralism. There's another version of this which is like, or especially like if instead of imagining the US, you're imagining like like I think there, at least conceivably, are authoritarian countries where like you actually do want it to be possible for things to break away. And yeah, I guess there is also this third thing, which is like the letter of the law really is like not as clear as you might hope in many cases. It's not totally so like I don't know. I was thinking about this before we started. Like one thing you could imagine doing is like being pro pluralism instead of like pro the letter of the law. Like it's not. I don't know. I didn't spend like 10 minutes thinking about ways in which that could be bad. So probably like there are a bunch of ways that could be bad.
I mean, another possibility is you act in accordance with how you predict the Supreme Court judges will resolve this question, assuming that they're acting in good faith.
In good faith seems tricky and hard to define.
Yeah, or you know, assuming they're trying to be reasonable. You know, the law often has like, you know, reasonable judgment and things like this. Just because if you don't say in good faith, then there's like, oh, if all the Supreme Court now decide they want to do a coup, then the AI knows that, then the AI just does a coup. So you want to have something there to kind of idealize it.
Yeah, I think there's probably some way you could do it.
I mean, the thing is about AI, you can give it these fuzzy things like assuming they're trying to be in good faith, assuming they're being reasonable, and just like humans do, it's able to work with it, even though it's not kind of mathematically specified.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I guess so talking more about ways of stopping coups. I think one path is like things you mentioned in the paper, you know, like try to align to things other than it's definitely just going to be what this one person wants. Try and prevent lab-led coups by doing, you know, making labs transparent, having like some regulation of labs. I guess preventing executive-led coups, presumably the thing to do there is just like try and elect people who won't do coups.
I think there's like, you know, building consensus among many different parts of society, especially the checks and balances parts, that we want AI to follow the law, to not be used to increase the partisan power of the current elected officials. We had a consensus that military systems shouldn't all report to one person, but should, you know, all report to many different humans. And if you can build consensus around that, then that can make it more of an uphill struggle for a head of state that wants to stage a coup.
So, like in the report, a lot of the proposals for how to prevent a coup are very like, here's things that we as a society could do. One thing you could potentially do to prevent a coup is also like sabotage type things, or at least things that like individuals could do, or you know things that are less like globally, you know, global plans. So what I mean, one very minimal version of this is like, if you imagine there's like some authoritarian country that you think is like at high risk of an AI-enabled coup, you just like not sell AI weapons to them. That's like a moderate version of this. You can also imagine like, okay, even if there's not like a policy for my AI lab to like prevent coups, you can imagine individual workers in an AI lab saying like, okay, I'm going to quit, or I'm going to like I'm going to insert my like don't do coups bit into the code slightly surreptitiously. I'm wondering what you think about these like more individual-ish moves.
I definitely support whistleblowing and encourage employees of AI labs to be like, okay, what's going to be my line? As you know, if there is movement towards just, you know, less transparency into what the AI is being aligned to, or like even just like it's becoming clear that it's being aligned to the company or to specific people, what is your line in which you're going to whistleblow? You know, I think one thing that employees can do is be like, I am going to, you know, hold myself accountable to getting positive affirmation that this isn't happening. You know, I'm going to make sure that it's not possible for the company to sneak in a secret loyalty, given that I'm aware of what the company systems are like. And I'm going to ensure that the company isn't making training AI overtly to be loyal. And so I think, you know, it would be great if there was a culture at companies where like, it's just like, obviously we wouldn't want this to happen. Obviously we don't think anyone here would try and do this, but we need to have a, you know, an attitude of vigilance, because that's what, you know, makes it true that this would never happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's good. And one more positive framing for this is being like what one great thing to aim for as a company is to make a product which everyone absolutely knows they can trust. Even people who don't trust our staff and our processes and think we're crooked and think we're going to try and seize power, even they should just know they can trust our systems, because that's what a good product looks like. So you can frame this in terms of building amazing products that ultimately you want national security to use. Like if you anticipate that it's going to be public knowledge that sleeper agents are possible, that secret loyalties are possible, then you might anticipate for the government to like proactively use our AIs in the military and in other critical systems. They're going to want to like really have strong assurances and not just trust that there's nothing fishy going on, and that that's what I'm aiming for purely product-based reasons. So I do think pushing towards that culture is one thing you can do as an individual. I feel more nervous about like trying to sabotage the training run in a way that prevents secret loyalties, but that no one else knows about, just because it's such a similar act to introducing secret loyalties. And I just think that all of that stuff should be very taboo, and the processes should prevent that.
If someone's been listening to this, in particular, I think a lot of my audience are people who do technical alignment research. So if someone's listening to this and they're interested in like, okay, let's prevent AI-enabled coups, is there like technical work in particular that you think is like valuable for people to work on here?
I think the biggest thing is technical work on detecting sleeper agents and secret loyalties, specifically in a setting where there is some kind of adversary that you expect to be purposely trying to hide that sleeper agent from you. So, historical sleeper agent work has often, at least this stuff from Anthropic, it's been designed to kind of illustrate the idea of misalignment. So it's AI kind of acts out when it sees it's 2026, but plays nice before that time. But those model organisms, as they're sometimes referred to, they're not really trying to illustrate the risk that someone is a human actor has created a secretly loyal sleeper agent that they specifically don't want other humans to discover. And so I think there's potential for a lot of technical work on this kind of offense-defense balance question of, if you have some attacker that has some kind of access to the training procedure, and you have some kind of defender that has, again, some level of access, again, maybe like seeing how the training worked or doing tests afterwards, can the attacker create a sleeper agent that the defender doesn't detect? And how sophisticated is that sleeper agent? And then, there's so many parameters here that ideally we want to be studying. So the attacker could have just access to like, the minimal access would just be they can put things on the internet that go into pre-training. A deeper level of access would be like, they can do, they can add lines to the fine-tuning code. But then maybe the defender can see that fine-tuning code, or maybe the defender can't. Or like maybe the attacker can like add additional training examples, which maybe the attacker can see or can't see. And so there's all these different kind of scenarios where like the attacker and defender have various different affordances. And ideally what we would have is a good understanding of under what situations does the defender reliably win. Because if we have that understanding, we can then set up our training process so that it is secure enough that the defenders indeed reliably win, given the actual kind of access that they have, and given like the likely access that we believe an attacker could gain.
How close do you think this is to just basically what AI control people are doing? Versus do you think there are like specific aspects of this that are not covered by like typical control research?
Well, I think it goes beyond control. So, interpretability is something you could look at here. Typically, we look at interpretability with a mind to accidental misalignment. But you could say, can I use interpretability to catch sleeper agents, even when the person is specifically trying to hide them? What if they know? What if they can guess the kinds of interpretability techniques I might be using in advance? Can I still detect the sleeper agent then? So basically take any method we have for testing alignment, black box testing, interpretability, looking through the training data. For many of those methods, you'll be able to adjust it to consider the more adversarial setting where someone is specifically trying to create a sleeper agent that you cannot detect. And so I think, it's not just control, it's kind of alignment and control. And then I don't think it's exactly the same as standard control, because it is a harder setting, because
Great.
as we touched on earlier, like the normal setting is where like the AI kind of has to zero shot, figuring out how to dodge all these tests and how to sabotage. Whereas here, like the attacker would have more ability to like help the AI do a good job
Like
using
pre-train it how to.
exactly. How much does it know about the company's control processes? If you're worried about an insider threat actor, then you might be worried. You might want to study, okay, how much of a better job can they do if they do versus do not know about the specific control setup. And I actually think the control research already looks at this variable.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it depends. I think it's one of these ideas that is caught on, and it's maybe a bit hard for. I think it's hard for the world to like refer to exactly one thing exactly by the term AI control. So
Yeah.
there's probably different people are thinking slightly different things, and it's worth thinking about like, okay, I want this version.
Yeah. But I'll just give it one last, pitch, I suppose, which is to say that there's so many people that have worked on misalignment from the perspective of, accidental misalignment. There is just, very few people that have really comparably gone in on like techniques for very powerful AI detecting purposeful sleeper agents. And I think it's going to be a really important problem. It's one day going to be commercially important, as we've discussed, because the government will want guarantees, but it's very neglected. And so I would really encourage technical people to work on this. Probably the first stage is actually a research agenda that sets out the space and looks at the current alignment techniques and what kinds of like best ways of adapting the research there would be to account for this new threat model.
So okay, that's like technical research people can do if they're interested in this threat model. But not all of my potential listeners to this episode are like technical researchers. I'm wondering like stuff other than technical research. Like, do you think there are like further questions that need answering here?
One thing I'll briefly mention is the info security side. So that is technical. I don't know how many of you researchers work on this, but a lot of info security is focused on weight exfiltration. But there are info security problems which arise from this threat model, which are new. So it's much more about how can you secure the training process against unauthorized edit access to the weights. So rather than read access to the weights to exfiltrate, it's edit access, and that has some distinctive features. And I think again, like a kind of a road mapping exercise that really that goes through all the different info security things that labs could do and thinks were all the best bets for making it hard to do significant unauthorized edits. Seems like lower hanging fruit. And then I think labs should be upweighting those relative to their previous prioritization. And so if you do info security, I'd really encourage you to pitch that project to your team. But you asked about non-technical work.
Yeah.
I think one thing is just doing more detailed threat modeling, as we've kind of touched upon in the conversation. There are lots of steps of these threat models that you could dig into in more detail. How hard would it actually be to train secret loyalties without detection? How hard would it be for those AIs to pass the secret loyalties on to the next generation and then to military systems? You could look into, okay, for the executive coup, what is the legal situation currently with respect to automated military systems? Who has legal authority over the procurement process, and who would by default be looped in to, if powerful AI military systems were being built, who would be looped into their loyalties and how they're being designed. And then, again, then thinking about mitigations. So once you've got a more detailed threat model, you can then think about, what one thing that I thought of recently is, well, if all the labs send a copy of their weights to some safe enclave, then it makes secret loyalties a much more risky prospect because they can't just delete those weights. And then, whoever they send the weights to can, in a few years' time, do tests with much more sophisticated techniques. So, it's possible that thinking through the threat models will bring up other ideas like that.
Well, yeah, in that case, you've got to be confident that the copy of the weights the lab sent you is like the actual thing that they're running. But there must be some way to.
Yeah, well, you can certainly do hashing the weights, so you can check that the copy you've received is the one that they're currently running, as long as you can kind of get them to actually hash the weights that they're really running and then compare them.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right. There's room for maneuvers there.
Yeah. I wonder if this is so. Sometimes people talk about yeah, we're gonna have chips like computer chips, and they're gonna have a little thing on them that checks if you're doing like really crazy AI training and reports that. Just so that we can, so that governments can monitor like how much AI training people are doing. It seems like a similar thing you might want to do with chips is like, yeah, are people running the model weights that they say they're running? That seems like it's potentially like valuable for this threat model.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. But if you've like what you could do, you finish your training process, you kind of hash the weights, then you do all these kind of in-depth alignment tests. And then you send the weights to the safe enclave so that then you can do even more tests later, and then you have the chips regularly check that the weights are the same as what you ended up with.
I guess also presumably there's some amount of just thinking about structures that would be good. So like I think you mentioned that a centralized AI project, like if you structured it correctly, like maybe it would be good at being like AI enabled, Q resistant. Like I imagine there's probably more thinking someone could do about how you would like actually set that up.
Yeah, and for all the recommendations in the paper, there's a lot more thinking about implementation. We're giving recommendations on a very high level. Transparency about various different things, and sharing of capabilities with different parts of society to avoid exclusive access, and AI should follow rules that mean they can't be used for coups, but all of that thing, what rules exactly, and exactly how we're going to structure this transparency requirement, and which exact bodies should be AI capabilities should they be shared with. So one type of work I'm excited about is working on drafting contracts between governments and labs that specify these requirements concretely. Yeah, and similarly for setting up as a centralized project, getting much more detail about how it would be structured, as you say.
I think I'd like to move a little bit onto Forethought, the organization that like put out this. But before I do that, is there any like last things you want to say about AI-enabled coups?
I'll say one more thing, which is that I think it's really helpful in many contexts to be very explicit about the threat model we're concerned with. We've talked very explicitly about executive coups and lab leaders doing coups. That's helpful for thinking clearly. I don't think it's the most helpful frame in many contexts. Coups sound kind of extreme in many contexts, and it sounds like an adversarial framing. It sounds like you're pointing fingers at individuals, rather than just being like, well, obviously no one should be able to do this. And so I do think like there are other more useful frames in many contexts. So rather than like let's prevent secret loyalties, I like the frame of system integrity, which just means the system does what it says on the tin, hasn't been tampered with. And rather than preventing an executive coup, you can talk about checks and balances, rule of law, democratic robustness.
Yeah, that's a good point. So okay, and I still want to talk a little bit about Forethought. So Forethought is this like newish organization, and like in March or April, you guys put out a bunch of papers, or a bunch of reports. What's Forethought? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a research organization. We kind of aspire to be considered a successor to FHI. So FHI was a macro strategy research organization. So kind of thinking about strategy in the most zoomed out terms possible. Often it was kind of thinking about the very long run future and the different outcomes that might occur. But things like the vulnerable world hypothesis and astronomical waste are kind of big picture questions that big picture papers that came out of that institute, FHI. And so we're aspiring to kind of be the follow on successor that is tackling the really big strategy questions. And the kind of way we're currently framing it is we are going over the coming decades very, very plausibly to transition to a world with super intelligent AI systems. That is just going to bring a whole host of major changes. AI misalignment risk is one really important risk to be thinking about over that transition, but there will just be a whole host of other issues. AI-enabled coups is one example, and it's the first one that we've really focused on, or at least that I've really focused on. But it's not the only one. I mean, I really enjoyed your recent podcast on kind of AI rights. I think that's going to be another really big issue that is very much on our radar. And there's going to be many other big issues as well. Where another one that we're excited about is just that at some point we're going to start kind of gaining access and using resources in space, and there's how those resources are used is going to be a very, very important question. That is basically all the resources, and we have no idea how we're going to use them, how we're going to divvy them up, what the processes will be. In a sense, everything is up for grabs in that decision. So that's another big example. And I expect there'll be other things where just there's going to be so much change as we're going through this. There's just going to be a lot of things which emerge, and so our aspiration is to kind of be keeping our eye on the ball of these very high level strategic questions and issues, and trying to help us figure out what we should do about them.
Yeah, you mentioned that like the first thing that you focused on is AI-enabled coups. The things you've mentioned, are those like roughly the things that you expect the institute to prioritize, or like, yeah, well, what might I see out of Forethought in the next year or so?
I think those are our current best guesses. The things I mentioned. So I think space governance, you might well see stuff on that. You might well see stuff on AI rights, or specific schemes to kind of pay the AIs to work with us if they are misaligned. Something that we feel quite excited about and seems still underexplored, though it's getting more attention, which is great. I think kind of positive uses of AI for kind of improving epistemics, for improving government decision making, for ensuring that democracies don't fall behind autocracies in an automated economy. Those are some other issues that seem like we might well focus on. Like another issue would be like, okay, if we're choosing these AI's personality, exactly what should it be aligned to? Which is again a question which is getting more attention, but is going to be very, very consequential.
Another thing to ask, a bunch of my listeners are like, they're maybe they're coming out of undergrad, maybe they're like maybe they're in a space where they're considering changing careers. Is Forethought hiring?
Yeah, we're planning to do an open hiring round soon. I'm not sure exactly when we'll release it, but I would really encourage people to apply. I think there's a lot of talent out there, and I expect there's a lot of talent we're completely unaware of. So, even if you don't think that you've got the skills or the knowledge, there's no great on-ramp to doing this kind of work at the moment. And, I think there's a big danger of people, just ruling themselves out prematurely. So when we do release the open hiring round, please throw in an application.
Final thing I want to ask, suppose someone listened to this episode, they found it interesting and they want to hear more about the work you do. How should they go about doing that?
For me personally, you can follow me on Twitter. If you Google Tom Davidson AI X, then you'll see my Twitter pop up on Google. So you can follow me, subscribe. I post basically all of my research on Less Wrong, because that's where a big community that cares about similar issues is. So you can, if you have a Less Wrong account, you can subscribe there. We have a Forethought Substack. So if you just Google Forethought Substack, then the top link, subscribe. That'd be great. And then you can also follow Will McCaskill, who's the other senior researcher at Forethought. Follow him on Twitter and Less Strong as well.
Great. So yeah, links for all of that will be in the description of this episode. Tom, thanks very much for coming on. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, real pleasure. Thanks so much, Daniel.
This episode was edited by Kate Brunotz, and Amador Nace helped with transcription. The opening and closing themes are by Jack Garrett. The episode was recorded at Far Labs. Financial support for the episode was provided by the Long-Term Future Fund, along with patrons such as Alexei Malafeyev. To read a transcript, you can visit axrp.net. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/axrpodcast, or give a one-off donation at ko-fi.com/axrpodcast. That's ko-fi.com/axrpodcast. Finally, you can leave your thoughts on this episode at axrp.fyi.